Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning for our webinar on improving maternity outcomes for ethnic minority women. I'm Lena Safjani, partner in the Medical Negligence Department at Owen Mitchell's London office, and I'm also the co-chair of my firm's Race Diversity Network, I Am Respect. I'm going to be co-hosting this morning's webinar with my colleagues Julianne Moore, Anne Kavanagh and Sarah Whelan's, and on behalf of all of us, a very warm welcome to you all this morning. So during today's webinar, we're going to be exploring the topic of maternity outcomes for ethnic minority women in the UK. So specifically, we're going to be discussing the issue of race in the context of maternity care. When it comes to matters of race, I know as co-chair of my firm's Race Diversity Network that it's not always an easy topic to talk about. Race is often seen as a taboo subject or a sensitive issue that makes many of us feel uncomfortable. In the past year at Owen Mitchell, we've held a number of Let's Talk About Race sessions with our members of staff across the country, where we've had full and frank discussions about race and its impact on all aspects of life. We've talked about race, not just in the context of the workplace, but also in relation to our relationships, our families, our experiences at school, college, university, and essentially society as a whole. Those conversations have been illuminating for all of us at Owen Mitchell in different ways. Most importantly, it's helped us gain a better appreciation of our different, diverse, and varied lived experiences. As such, we wholeheartedly encourage open and honest discussion and debate that bring important race issues to the fore. Many of you will be aware that last year Embrace published an updated report on maternal deaths in childbirth in the UK, looking at the period between 2016 and 2018. In that 2-year period of the study, there were 2.2 million pregnancies that resulted in birth, and out of that total, 242 women sadly died from either direct or indirect causes of pregnancy or childbirth within 6 weeks after pregnancy, and 547 during or up to 1 year after pregnancy. A key finding of the report is that women from ethnic minority communities are more likely than white women to die during childbirth or within the first year of their baby's life. Specifically and concerningly, the report found that in comparison to white women, Black women were 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy and childbirth-related causes, mixed ethnicity women 3 times more likely, and Asian women twice as likely. So these findings raise some uncomfortable questions. Why are ethnic minority women so much more likely to die from pregnancy and childbirth-related causes in comparison to white women? Who are the women that lie behind these tragic statistics? Why, statistically, are you at higher risk of maternal death if you are from an ethnic minority community? These are difficult questions and there might not be any easy answers, but what we do know for sure is that if we collectively want to address the concerns that this research has highlighted, we need to dig deeper into the data, and most importantly, we need to talk about the issues. So on that note, I'm delighted to introduce our panel of speakers this morning. We are joined by Sylvia Parks and Keisha Gordon-Langham, mother and sister to Delissa Park, who sadly lost her life after giving birth to her daughter Thoraya in 2015. We're also joined by Dr. Karen Joash, consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust. We're joined by Binesh Nazmeen, specialist cultural liaison midwife from Bolton NHS Foundation Trust, and Tinuke Owe and Chloe Abe from the grassroots organisation 5 Times More. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us this morning to contribute to this important discussion. We're going to hear from Sylvia and Keisha first, followed by my colleague Anne Kavanagh. We will then hear from Dr. Joash, and we'll then have a 5-minute comfort break around about 11 o'clock. And then after the break, we'll hear from Tinuke and Chloe from 5 Times More. And following that, we'll be having a panel Q&A session, which my colleague Julianne Moore will be hosting. Before we get started, just a few quick practical points for our listeners. Firstly, if you haven't already done so, please just make sure your mics are on mute. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded, so it will be available for later viewing and sharing, and we'll be circulating a link after the event. And finally, many of you have already submitted questions in advance of today's webinar, but just to flag to you all, there is a Q&A box located to the right of your screen. So as you hear from our speakers, please do submit further questions. We're not going to have an opportunity for questions immediately after we hear from each speaker, but we're going to have a separate Q&A session later on, as I say. When you submit your questions, if you can, please include your name and email address. So if we don't have time to come to the question, we'll make sure we come back to you later on. So on that note, I am now going to hand over to our first speakers, who are Sylvia Parks and her daughter Keisha Gordon-Langham. Sylvia and Keisha are both here with us today to talk to us about their own tragic experience of losing their beloved daughter and sister, Delissa Parks, who sadly passed away in 2015 whilst giving birth to her daughter, Soraya. Soraya sadly sustained a brain injury due to the circumstances of her birth, and their lawyer is my colleague Richard Kayser, who's been conducting the legal investigation concerning the circumstances of Soraya's birth. In Delissa's memory, her family have set up the Delissa Christina's Princess Foundation to raise awareness around maternal death, miscarriage and birth injuries. Sylvia and Keisha, I'll hand over to you. Thank you both for joining us today.
First of all, I just want to thank you for allowing us into this session to speak about Delissa, and hopefully what we have to say today will contribute to making a change. Delissa died in 2015, as you said, just echoing what you said, in childbirth. The circumstances around her childbirth was that, as far as we were aware and as far as Delissa thought, that she was having a normal, whatever that is, pregnancy. And it was when she was, I don't know if you want to take over, when she was 3 months pregnant, that a mass was found in her womb. In the uterus.
Yeah. Well, a mass was found in a scan, and it was seen on the screen when she had her first scan. So she started early bleeding, and that's what alerted them. So that scan was seen at 6 weeks. That lump was seen, that shadow was seen at 6 weeks, and then seen again at the next scan, which would have been 18-week or so scan.
20 week.
Yeah, 20-week scan. And it wasn't really followed through. Nothing was really followed through. It wasn't investigated. It wasn't followed through. During her birth, during Soraya's, so just before.
Yeah. So before that, so if we take you back a step, so Delissa, so she had this mass. It wasn't acted upon, and due to this mass, Soraya, when she was in the uterus, she didn't turn. So she was breech, wasn't she? So she was offered the option of a manual turn, so to engage the baby, which Delissa consented to. And even before they had turned the baby, they hadn't investigated into reasons why she hadn't turned. So she's gone for this turn, and it went downhill for Delissa from then. So they turned the baby manually, and I think a few days later she was being sick, she was clammy, she was vomiting.
Baby wasn't sitting properly in the womb.
In the womb, due to the restricted space what she had, and it just went downhill for her. And I think she had the turn, I think it was a week before, and then the following week she said that she thought she was in labour. So I remember the morning, my mum called me and asked me if I could assist her at the hospital. So, going through all the childcare arrangements and whatever. So we decided that we'd meet at the hospital because we wouldn't know how long we would be there if we drove. So we got to the hospital, and we literally got there at the same time. We met at the lift, and we went up to the labour ward. And we were greeted by a healthcare assistant who sat with us, and we was laughing and we was joking because, as far as we were concerned, Delissa was in labour and she's going to have a baby. So, everyone's happy, we're all excited. And I'm taking pictures of her and I'm sending to the family saying, oh, look, she's in labour, oh my gosh, she's in pain. She's been a bit dramatic. And then the healthcare assistant said to us, if she's feeling pain, the best thing for you to do is download a contraction calculator and time the contractions, which we were doing. So we did this, and say after about an hour or so, consultant comes in who's done the manual turn. So he comes in and he does a quick scan on the baby just to check that the baby's still head down. Checks that the baby's still head down and says the baby has a free head. So at that point, I had 3 children. I've never heard of a free head. And So I asked him, well, what does that mean? And he said, oh, the baby's not engaged yet, but that's not a problem. The baby will engage as she goes into labour. So didn't think nothing of it. I'm not a medical professional, so wouldn't think anything of it. And then we were taken down to the birthing suite because Delissa wanted to have a water birth. So bearing in mind, she had this manual turn and the baby's head was free. They were still high and free, yeah. They were still saying that she could have this water birth. What's happened? Oh, they were still saying that she could have this water birth. So we've gone downstairs to the birthing centre, and we've been greeted by another midwife who tries then to find Soraya's heartbeat, and it's taken her a very, very long time to find it. So at this point, I'm still messaging the family and letting the family know what's going on. And I look up and I say, Delissa, can you feel the baby moving? Because I don't understand what's taking so long to feel for them to find the baby's heartbeat. And Delissa said, yeah, I can feel her. And then the nurse kind of shuts me up by saying, it's okay, I know the baby's heart is beating because she's just had a scan. So instead of her being sure that she can hear the baby's heartbeat, she's relying on what her colleague has just seen. So she's then gone to give Delissa a internal, and she says she's 1 centimetre at this point. So she said, but you feel like you're really constipated. And Delissa said, yeah, I am very constipated. So instead of her, now we know, offering her an enema, she sent her home with a suppository. So at this point, Delissa was contracting, having contractions every 5 minutes for 40 seconds. And she said she's going to send her home. And I said, well, why are you going to send her home? Because she's contracting every 6 minutes for 40 seconds when we're told that when she's contracting for 5 minutes for 1 minute, she's in active labour. So she then turns to me and says, if we had every woman here at 1 centimetre, then the ward would be full. So then I'm thinking, well, this doesn't sound right, because if she's contracting so closely together, as soon as we get home, it's going to be time to get back. So I try to sweet talk this nurse now, and I say to her, oh, I think I've seen you somewhere before. I'm sure you've given birth to my children, whatever, hoping that she will take a different view on what her decision was. She then proceeds to so then I start questioning her about this free head, and then she starts telling me that because Delissa was an Afro-Caribbean woman, her pelvis is tilted backwards, hence why the baby's head is not engaged and it's free. Then she starts giving us a warning that it might be that the cord is going to come out first, and in the event that that does, she needs to push it back inside her or wrap it in a plastic bag and keep it warm. So my first reaction is, why are you going to send us home and you've given us all these actions to do? And she said, but in any event, call an ambulance. So I said, well, can you put a neonatal alert on her file so that whoever the next person is to take up her records, they know exactly what's going on? And she said, oh, no, there's no need for that. So we're still trying to question her and all this stuff, and she's just like, nope, she's going to have to go home today. So we then eventually leave the hospital, and then we get back to my mum's house because that's where Delissa was staying. And I said to Delissa, should we just go back and say that you're in pain? And then Delissa turns to me and says, there's no point in me going back because they're not going to listen. And we didn't go back to the hospital until I think it was the evening I came back, popped back into my mum's house, and she was walking up and down the stairs trying to get back into active labour. And then my mum...
So I came home from work, and Delissa looked really clammy, looked really sort of like swollen, and she had like the suppositories on the top of her handbag, and she said she can't take them. She's not able to, put them in. She's that constipated. And I said, okay, we're going to see how it goes, because we're not going to be, pushing any cord or anything back in anywhere. So as soon as you start to feel pain, we're going to the hospital. So, I tried to cook her some dinner. I'm just trying to quickly take you through because everything sort of like ties together. We quickly cooked her some, we done dinner. She said she's scared to eat. If she eats, it's going to, she feels too much pain. I said, well, you need to feel pain. She had a show around 7 that evening, and we're all excited. Yes, it's coming. Yes, it's happening. She said when my husband came in, and he looks at her like, you know, men don't notice anything, but you notice this. And he's saying, what's going on? You know, her skin just looked really, I don't know what that was up until now, really damp and clammy. So she said we said we're going to go to bed. She said she's going to sleep on the sofa. She's not able to go upstairs. She was in that much discomfort. She's not sure what she's feeling, whether it's pain or whether it's discomfort or whether it's constipation. She's not sure, but she wasn't able to use the suppositories. To be honest, I'm so upset with myself because I think I should have moved then, you know, but I didn't. I texted her before I got into bed. She was downstairs. I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yeah, fine. This baby's never going to come." I said, "Don't be silly. Just call me if you know anything." At 3 that morning, one of our other children came upstairs and called me, said Delissa was downstairs. She's on the floor bleeding. You know, we know she's drama. That's all we can say. She's so dramatic. And she was doing this ow thing. I said, okay, I'm not going to call an ambulance. I'm not going to drive because the plan was to drive you. I'm going to call an ambulance. And that's what we did. We called the ambulance. This took time. Looking back, everything just took time. We were outside for ages. Ambulance woman wasn't even to know what was going to take place. You know, in hindsight, maybe we'd have moved quicker. We got to the hospital. We met a midwife. We went to the birthing. No, we arrived and we went to the birthing suite first. Yeah. And then they took us upstairs to check her out. So I can't remember why we were in 2 different places, but she was 9 centimeters when they examined her. And we went back downstairs to the birthing pool. She was put into the birthing pool. She started pushing. She was pushing stools. The thing I remember that night was that this midwife just did not engage with me at all. But with all the excitement and everything, I'm thinking, you know, she's just going to have her baby. I'm going to go home, go to work. I'm not bothered about a midwife. I'm there with Delissa. Delissa was going to be fine. Delissa started pushing. She pushed stools, hard white stools, and they cleaned the pool. It happened again. They cleaned the pool. Then the midwife, I was filming, and I'm so glad that I actually tried to film her. She did tell me to switch off because she couldn't see because of the light. You know, it was a dark room, so I switched it off. I apologize. I've got all that on. I don't watch it, but I've got all that on video, and I was able to show it to the necessary people. She was trying to find a heartbeat, Soraya's heartbeat. She told Delissa to go and sit on the toilet. There's feces in front of the baby's head, and once that goes, the baby's head would come. Delissa, a couple of minutes, she started, calling out, something's come. I thought it was the baby's head, so she got her up, walked her to the bed. You could see, I thought it was the head because it was quite dark. I'm ready with my camera, and she says to me, "Mum, don't take my picture." I said, "You're going to thank me later." Can you imagine? It was actually the midwife then said to us, it's the membranes, and it's bloody, so she's going to sever the membranes to see what's going on. And that's what she did, and Delissa started bleeding. A button wasn't pressed, a buzzer wasn't pressed. She was put in a chair, she stood up, there was blood. She was taken to another floor. When she got to the other floor, she got up, she was just bleeding. This midwife has said at the inquest that in her report that wasn't blood, that was umbilical fluid. I don't believe that. Reports didn't show that. So we get to the ward. They're trying to find a heartbeat. Delissa's screaming. She'd been 9 centimeters dilated for about an hour and a half now. She's screaming, in pain. And another lady, an English lady, comes and she gets one of these computer things, and she finds the heartbeat. The heartbeat is the same as Delissa's. Before that, a doctor had come in, and he called a name which wasn't Delissa's name, and he said that he left to go, and the midwife that was there at the time, not the one in the room, she said, "Would you not look at her then? She's just come from labour ward," and there was blood everywhere. He said he was coming back, and for about 10 minutes or more, that doctor didn't come back. And he came back in and he said, okay, he was going to have a look at her. He was the one that proceeded to put a clip on Soraya's head. Delissa was screaming. This other lady came in with the screen and she took the, got the heartbeat. He said C-section. The last thing Delissa said is, am I having a cesarean? And he said, yes. That's the last words that I heard. And I got up to go. And they said, you cannot go because it's an emergency. All this time, I have not spoken to or seen this midwife. I was in this room for over an hour. My battery's dying. I'm calling my husband. I'm, I'm sitting amongst blood, and everybody's gone for over an hour. And then somebody comes into the room, a midwife, by mistake, and she said, oh, she saw the blood. She said, are you okay? I said, my daughter's been gone for over an hour. Nobody's come back to say anything. What is going on? Because I'm remembering these programs we used to sit and watch. 10 minutes, baby's born, come back. You're told that the person's told. That didn't happen that day. And then the midwife that was in the room was what we had received us in the birthing pool that had hardly said 2 words to us. She came in crying, trying to hug me. I was hysterical. And that's when I learned that Delissa had suffered a cardiac arrest and Soraya was deprived of oxygen and she was fighting for her life, 2 of them. Delissa died
9:30 the same day. Delissa passed away. So what happened after that was baby was taken to the special care unit at Lewisham, and they were trying to get Delissa stable.
She was having heart attack after heart attack. They thought it was something to do with the umbilical fluid.
Yep. So that, yeah.
There was issues with that. So on the day we didn't really know what it was, but she fought for her life. She was put on a ECMO machine.
They had to fly a specialist team from St Thomas's in to put her on a machine. I think there's only like a few of them in the country, on an ECMO machine, because they wanted to put the oxygen back into her blood. And then they then said that they wanted to bring her to the specialist team at St Thomas's, and they transported her in an ambulance there, and we were told to go over there as well, and we made our way. And then I think it was probably about 8:30, if my mind serves me correct, that they then said that basically
pupils were fixed and dilated, and there was nothing else that they could do for Delissa. Delissa died. Up until now, I'm not even sure the time, exact time.
I think it was after 9, so it almost feels, it was after. So it was 9 o'clock the evening. She passed away, and I just think, for the sake of 1 minute and 20 seconds, you couldn't keep her in hospital just to monitor her, bearing in mind all the concerns, the fact that the baby's head was free, the fact that she was severely she had severe constipation.
And this was in notes that so what happened at this particular hospital was that they didn't link the notes, because this was an ongoing issue for Delissa, and it's something called a megarectum that we've since heard, and there's only sort of like 3 people that it's happened to. Delissa's the third that they know of. 1 person died, the other person survived, so they didn't know what way it would have, what outcome would have been for Delissa. But we were told at the inquest that this particular doctor had said that Afro-Caribbean women's pelvises are different than black women's, and that was his reason for discharging Delissa on the 7th of December. October, the 7th of October.
Yeah, and what I'd like to say at this point to you both is I'm so very sorry for your loss. I know you both feel strongly about sharing Delissa's story and raising awareness, but I fully appreciate that, even 5-6 years after the event, it's incredibly difficult. Now, you both shared some pictures of Delissa and Soraya, so we'll just bring them up on screen, and perhaps you can also just tell us, you both feel very strongly about raising awareness of race issues in maternal care, and you've set up a foundation in Delissa's legacy. So can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about that and its objectives?
Okay, so I just couldn't think of anything that I could do. Delissa was a very shy person, you know, in terms of the issue of megarectum and constipation. She'd stopped talking about that. She had issues, you know, since she was young, and she stopped talking about that since she was about teenage years. You could not get her to talk about it. We thought she was managing it okay because she would pile vegetables on her plate just to try and help herself. So for us to be out here talking about this, I don't know, she'd probably be turning in her grave. But I just feel that is something that we have to do to get across that this is an issue. You know, a megarectum is real and it can kill. And also that, you know, as a young girl, a black girl, going into a hospital, asking for help or, you know, trying to put her feelings across and you're not listened to, that's the issue that we want to get to. That's the people that we want to try and support. That is what we want to make aware for midwives to actually put yourself in a position. What would you like for yourself or for somebody that you loved if they was to enter a hospital? What would your relationship be like with them? How would you speak to them? How would you like to be treated? You know, it's about listening to the concerns of your clients, of your patients. You know, and we found that Delissa, you know, she fell short of that. You know, she wasn't a type of person to be able to express herself, and she didn't. And I feel so guilty because I could have said so much that night, but I was sure that she was going to be okay, that she was going to come, you know, and have her baby just like all our other grandchildren, and you know, and she was going to be fine. That wasn't the case for Delissa. So the foundation is aimed to bring about awareness and change to support women who are in this situation, who feel that they don't have a voice, they're not heard, you know, they're not, you know, they're not listened to.
And not only that, like I think in the ideally, what would be great in an ideal world would be just like in a criminal sector, you go to court, there's a duty solicitor that can go before the court and speak on your behalf. There should be something like that within the hospital. So someone independent from the nurses and the doctors that you can go to, that are on site, that you can speak to any concerns that you have, and they can give you a list of questions or a list of things that the doctor should tell you before you leave. I think that would be the change that we'd love to have moving forward, so that women are given a voice. I mean, you go for your first booking appointment at a hospital, at the doctors, and they ask you all these different questions about your personal circumstances, and it seems like you're categorised before you've even made it anywhere. They ask you about your housing, whether you're on benefits, whether you're working, whether you're not working, how many children you have, and are they the same biological parents and all sorts. But what is it for? It doesn't help you anywhere in the long run, and I just think that it should be a more of an equal. Everyone should be on an equal footing, and I think if there was an independent advocate within the hospital, which would, you know, eventually probably like to provide, then I think that women are given that extra chance. Even as well, interpreters, are they at the hospital? How do you ensure and make sure that this person has fully understood what she's been told?
Yeah,
there's nothing.
I agree. And what really comes across from what you said is communication, and not feeling that you've been listened to. And I think what you say, Keisha, is a brilliant idea. It's having an advocate really on behalf of women who otherwise might not be heard. Look, thank you so much. We talk about numbers and statistics, which are alarming and concerning, but behind every statistic, there is a woman who has lost her life and a child who's lost their mother. And I think it's so important for us all to hear really about the human aspect behind the numbers, and the ripple effect that it can have on family members and wider society. You know, I can sense the emotion and just how raw it all feels to you both, even so many years after the event. And once again, you know, thank you so much to you both for coming here to speak to us today. I know hopefully you're going to be available later on for our panel Q&A, and thank you also for sharing the lovely pictures of Delissa and Soraya. So there might be questions for you later, so we'll come back to you later on in the Q&A session. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anne Kavanagh. Anne's a partner in our medical negligence team in London with a special interest in maternal death and birth injury cases. So following on from Delissa and Soraya's story, Anne's going to talk to us about the cultural and race issues which arise in legal claims. Anne, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Lena, and thank you both, Sylvia and Keisha. I want to turn briefly to what we see in clinical negligence practice and the issues we're discussing today and how they intersect with that. I should probably say that in over 20 years of practice, I've not come across any cases which have included allegations of racial bias in a claim, but, and it's a big but, my experience and that of colleagues in the London team is that there is a disproportionate representation of women and families of ethnic minority backgrounds in the cases that we investigate. So moving on then to look at our cases, in order to prove negligence, many of you, I'm sure, will be already aware of this, but we have to establish two tests, breach of duty and causation, and we have to prove both. Breach of duty is proven by looking at what medical staff are doing or not doing at the relevant time. And in order to succeed, we have to show that no other reasonably competent doctor, anaesthetist or midwife would have acted in that way or failed to act. And the standard expected is not what is perfect, but what other reasonably competent medical staff would have done in the same circumstances with the same level of information available to them at that time. And if we can establish substandard care or breach of duty, we also need to prove causation of injury, and that is that with reasonably competent care, the outcome would have been better. So we don't look at racial or other bias specifically, but it's something we hear from our clients, particularly in relation to issues around decision making, information and consent. And in relation to consent, you'll all be aware, I'm sure, of the Montgomery test, which says that in order to advise a woman, you have to be aware of the risks that they would consider to be material to them. And a material risk is a risk that a reasonable person in the patient's position would be likely to attach significance to, or a risk that the doctor or midwife should reasonably be aware that the relevant patient would be likely to attach significance to. All of that assumes a flow of communication and a level of trust and knowledge that, in my experience, is where problems can arise, particularly in relation to minority ethnic women in a maternity setting. So then moving on into slide 2, the key themes that we see emerging in relation to minority ethnic groups relate to communication, the knowledge base, and the role of subconscious bias. Communication probably is one of those central parts of the Venn diagram affecting everything, because the most common complaint, whether this complaint evolves to become a claim and negligence or not, is that the woman or the family were not listened to, or that the people they were interacting with did not hear what they were trying to say. Other examples would be where a woman felt that there was very little or no real effort made to explain what was happening. And typical examples are around induction, around the mode of delivery, particularly instrumental delivery, and the risks and benefits of that. And that lack of communication is something we hear, particularly also in relation to perineal and OASI injuries resulting from instrumental deliveries, and particularly again in women of South Asian origin. The second thing is the knowledge deficit, and that tends to relate to, for instance, the management of neonatal jaundice in babies, non-white babies. And there are also specific issues which arise in relation to the management of sickle cell disease in pregnancy. And finally, that subconscious bias, I think, is something else that is very difficult to identify, but clients feel it in the way that they are treated, in the interactions, as Sylvia and Keisha described earlier, actually, the sense that they weren't listened to or they were dismissed, and their concerns were not heard. So then moving on finally, this is a very rapid run through of some sample cases where those themes have come through. And sadly, all of these cases were negligent and resulted in settlements, but those settlements can never turn the clock back. And there's no question that all of the families involved in these cases would have given anything not to be in that position. The first of these is SK, which is a fatal case. This lady was 34, South Asian, very poor English. Her first pregnancy, and the pregnancy had been through IVF, which again was a major cultural issue for her and for her husband. An ultrasound scan, sadly, at 35 weeks identified fetal hydrops, and intrauterine death occurred a week later and led to induction and delivery. And post-delivery, she was prescribed Clexane for 7 days, but in fact, she was only given it for 2 days. Post-discharge, a week later, she was seen by the community midwife with shortness of breath, abdominal discomfort. The midwife acted absolutely correctly, arranged for her to be transferred to hospital. But again, on arrival in A&E, the clinicians who saw her, there was a break in that chain of communication. She wasn't able to express herself properly. They, for various reasons, did not take on board the information the community midwife had sent through, and they diagnosed her with endometriosis and discharged her home. 11 days later, her husband came home from work and found her dead at home, and the cause of death was a PE. So within the space of 3 weeks, that man had lost his baby and his wife. And again, as I say, liability was admitted, and it was also in the sense that if she had been given thromboprophylaxis as prescribed, she would have survived. The second case study, if we can move on the slide, please, Gigi, is the case of MA, another maternal death case, this time a 32-year-old lady in her second pregnancy. Her sickle cell disease had been managed at a different trust for the first pregnancy, and in this index pregnancy, she'd had top-up transfusions throughout, but she attended an acute chest crisis at 37 weeks with a possible suspected hemolytic transfusion reaction. And throughout that final admission, she had an increasing oxygen requirement and tachypnea requiring exchange transfusion. But there was a delay in her being seen and referred to the obstetric and hematology teams by the A&D staff, further delays between those two teams in communication, and ultimately, although her daughter was delivered safely and well by C-section, MA died later the same day as a result of multi-organ failure, despite heroic levels or heroic attempts to save her. Again, widower is left with 2 children under the age of 2. Absolutely devastating for the whole family. And finally, the third case study I wanted to highlight is the case of CC, which involves kernicterus, which is a form of cerebral palsy which arises as a result of hyperbilirubinemia. And this is a case where this was the family's 3rd child, born healthy in hospital. Both parents are Black British. Mum had raised concerns with the midwife following discharge because she's an experienced mum about the baby's colour and in particular the colour of his stools. But she was reassured and told it was nothing to worry about, it'd be fine. On day 5, changing his nappy, she knew his cry was different and she was worried about him, took him to A&E. They diagnosed hyperbilirubinemia. He was clearly very jaundiced. And unfortunately, again, there was a further delay in arranging a critical exchange transfusion, as a result of which he suffered severe brain damage. As I say, the pattern is called kernicterus, severe dystonic, quadriplegic, cerebral palsy, learning difficulties, etc. And he will need lifelong care. That claim settled in 2016 But again, his mum, I know, knows Sylvia and Keisha, and they've been enormously supportive of each other. But that mum would definitely say that although the claim has settled and she knows that there is financial security in the sense that he will be properly looked after for the rest of his life, it doesn't compensate for the devastating consequences to him, to her, and to the wider family, the impact of all of that and what it's done to them. So bearing all of that in mind, I am conscious that we see the worst outcomes. Those are the cases that make it through to full negligence claims and ultimately to resolution and compensation being paid. But there are many other families and women who contact us, and the themes I've described are repeated, but the standard of care does not meet the threshold or the tests in negligence. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Karen Joash, who will talk us through obstetric care and how to deliver compassionate and personalised maternity care for ethnic minority groups. Over to you, Karen.
Hello, everybody. Such a fantastic webinar. I just really want to commend the speakers that have gone before me, the stories that have really resonated with myself, the emotions that you feel. I want you to just remember them and use them just to drive you forward in the change. I just want to also commend Erwin Mitchell and Anne in terms of what she said, and I'm only going to add to that. We all come with different perspectives on this, but what we all see is one theme that runs true and runs through, which is about communication and is about listening. So as she's actually said a minute ago, it's all about trying to actually listen to people, to hear them. But what I want us to recognise is that we have caused Black and brown women to be silenced. And I gave a talk before talking about birth trauma, and there I said about the silent roars. But for me, it's the silent cries. It's the cries that we don't see because people have been silenced by stereotypes. And it's really sad to hear the story before, the lady that died, where her sister was trying to be nice to the midwife in order to actually perhaps gain some favour so she would give the correct care. So let's go on to the next slide. So do we have a problem? People think we don't have a problem. I'll show you on the next slide that there definitely is a problem. And there's a discussion, in many sectors where it's all about the lazy Black and brown populations that have caused our own health crisis. And I, first of all, want to put that to bed. So racism does exist, perhaps less in the UK. If you look at this graph, this is a graph which I've showed at some other webinars, which is of a study asking people would they be happy for their child to marry a Black person. So the darker green it is, that means 90 to 100% would be happy. And as it gets down to the red, they're not happy at all. As you can see, there are no dark green areas. That's no surprise. And in the UK, we can say, yes, we're perhaps better than the EU, but we're still not good enough. So even within the UK, if you've got 10 people in a room, 2 people will be racist. And so for me, I perceive that when we look at healthcare and the outcomes, the silent infection is racism. If we look on the next slide, you'll see a picture that's placed up of a child. If you look at the next slide, we can see that Albert Einstein tells us that without changing our own pattern of thought, we'll not be able to solve the problems we created with our current patterns of thought. So I put it to you, just put all your biases, assumptions aside, and just listen as I take you through a few facts. On the next slide, you will see us sitting around the table together, all different colours, different backgrounds, different genders. Does this happen? Does this occur in all settings? Actually, it probably doesn't. Even if we look at our healthcare workforce, we know that as you get further and further up, you have what we call snowy white peaks, where the people who are designing the systems are not necessarily the people who are in the system. And if we look at the next slide, please. It's partly, again, what was discussed right at the beginning, that people are scared to talk about race. But the problem is if we don't talk about race, We then reinforce racism by not just letting children draw their own conclusions and ourselves as we grow up, but within the workplace we will draw our own conclusions also. Next slide, please. So if we then look at what we see in the media, the next slide, please. If we see in the media, we see stereotypes. It has started to change a little bit now, but I remember the uproar that occurred at the after George Floyd when Sainsbury's put out a Christmas advert with a black family. It went wild on Twitter. People were offended and felt it was absolutely awful, not recognising that a significant proportion of the people who had been using Sainsbury's to that day were of black and brown backgrounds, but had never seen themselves on the telly in that way. But rather, this is what people would be happy to see. They would be happy to see a black child with famine, who's poor, who's said as violent, illiterate, bit primitive. And we love the slave narrative. It's all about being the slaves, about AIDS and war. But we need to also look at what stereotypes have pervaded into maternity. Of course, is to deliver the care that we give in the way that we give it at the moment. If we go on to the next slide, please. So when you look at this woman, what do you see? Do you see her somebody who's intelligent, who has a job, who's not a single mother, somebody worthy of compassionate, intelligent and individualised care? Or do you just see her as just another mother who's having another child because she's sexually overactive? And this is definitely what has pervaded into society and pervades society now. A black female target, that's what they called her in this study, was perceived more negatively in relation to societal stereotypes about sexual activity, sexual risk, motherhood status, socioeconomic status than a white female target. A black target was more likely to be perceived as a single mother and to need public assistance or help or benefits than a white target who was described as pregnant. And I know that was me. That was me in the South London hospital having my first child. I was on my third degree, unbeknown to the people who took care of me. I had done a bachelor's in biochemistry, a master's in biochemistry, and I'd actually decided to do medicine, so I was at medical school. And I was also actually married as well. However, the care I received was well below standard. The care I received meant, despite having a high-risk medical condition, which I developed together with my second pregnancy and was really highly monitored because of the risk of my baby, I was not highly monitored. I had to almost fight for my care and ask for my care time and time again, although I knew that the condition I had was at risk to my child. I then came in labour with a breech baby, with waters having gone. And then because they deemed that labour ward was busy and the people in the labour ward were far more important than me, I was put on a ward. I did not have my baby monitored for more than 30 hours. And when I walked to the desk gingerly, because I had a silent cry, the woman at the desk said to me, "Is your baby moving?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, then you know it's alive then, don't you?" And I was left to walk back to my bed unmonitored. When she eventually came to monitor me some hours later, there was a deceleration on their CTG. To which I called her, to which I was met with, again, a huff and a puff of why am I bothering her? The young black single mother filling the hospitals in South London who is irritating and annoying the midwife on her night shift. My treatment, unfortunately, didn't change much in that admission. Also remember being told I'll have a cesarean section a bit later. This is me now being in hospital for 3 days, waiting for them to do a cesarean for me. And despite me calling and asking for the doctor, I thought it was a bit long now, but I probably should have had my baby out after 48 hours, no antibiotics, nothing. I was told it's a bit risky to do a cesarean at night, they'll do it in the morning. In the morning, I was told I wasn't going to be done until the afternoon. And then again, by the time it got to, I had my breakfast, and then suddenly they rushed in and said, "Oh, we need to do you now because somebody more important will need her cesarean in the afternoon who's transferring in." My husband wasn't there. He had to rush from where he was. That was not their care. And just before we started delivering, he managed to rush in to theatre. Again, after theatre, when I was taken back down to the ward, and I felt a gush of blood onto the bed, which filled the sheets, called the butler, again met by a midwife, and this midwife this time was of the same colour as me, met with a huff and a puff, and as she pulled back the sheets and saw a mass of blood that was there, she said, "Oh, you are bleeding a bit. It's okay, I'll clean you up," and proceeds to pull back the sheet, and again just left me. That's my story, so I know that it occurs, and I know the difference in how you're treated according to what people see. Next slide, please. So when Anne talks about the outcomes, I want you to pull you to a study again from the States, which talks about the term gendered racism, because this is what is occurring. It occurs daily throughout our lifetime, and specifically during pregnancy. It influences Black and brown women's sexual and reproductive health, and it places them at increased risk for adverse birth outcomes, including preterm birth, low birth weight, newborn morbidity and mortality, and poorer mental health outcomes also. Next slide, please. And it's the morbidity I want to also talk about. If we look at this is talking about the acts of racism. But if we really delve deeper and we think about this in the context of maternal outcomes, right on the red part are the maternal deaths. But there are thousands and thousands of women, as Anne has said, who don't come to the table, who still are affected by racism every day. Next slide, please. So what's racism? And healthcare, it is a passive-aggressive racism. Very rarely will it be overt, difficult to provide evidence for, reluctant for us to actually report these inappropriate incidents. They're hard to prove. We just bite the bullet and get on with it, exactly as I did when I had my first child. Next slide, please. So again, we will call them the racial microaggressions. Deliberately, actually, and this I love this because I'm just going to flip it around to let you see what happens in maternity. So going to actually, deal with a white couple first because they look like they would complain or say something if you haven't seen them, rather than the Black person who needs her pain relief and so forth. Or the micro insults. Oh, you're so articulate. Okay, you're the whitest Black person I know. And micro-invalidation, so you nullify their thoughts or their feelings and experiences. Tell them, oh, where are you from? When they're talking about actually what they really want within their care. No, actually, we know better. We're medical professionals. And it provides difficulty when you're trying to confront them. Next slide, please. So Professor David Williams talks about the impact of racism and discrimination and how they have on health. So even if we move away from thinking just simply about, is it simply about being nice to people, or are we ourselves and the way that our systems are set up and the way we deliver it are causing the harm to the women that we serve? And even if we don't particularly care about causing harm to the women that we serve, do we care about harm to the system, about the added cost to the system? So the next slide, please, will show you some of the work that he uncovered when he looked at aging, premature aging that occurs within Black women. So if we look at our chromosomes, you can check and see if they become shortened, which is a natural aging process. And so he did some investigations, if we show the next slide, looking at the difference that occurs in Black women. We lose these naturally with age, and it's very easy to get a cell and to pick them out and to look at under a microscope and work out what the changes are. And the next slide, if that's okay, will show you the racial differences in telomere length. They found that Black women had shorter telomeres than white women, and at the same age, they had accelerated biological aging of about 7.5 years. And this was irrespective of social economic background. If we go on to the next slide, please. Racism is essentially toxic for health. And racism, as she says here, is actually part of the pandemic, which was laid bare by COVID-19. Next slide, please. So race, it's really important to recognise that matters for health after all social economic, that's the SE I've got on the slide, are taken out. And it's due to high levels of exposure to stress, financial work, community, discriminations, microaggressions, media, and also in our healthcare system, where our healthcare system should be a haven where we really support and embrace the women that come to us to deliver their children and to grow their family? Are we leading to premature aging and biological damage within that system? Are we causing psychological damage as well as stress? And I think, unfortunately, we are. We go on to the next slide, please. So I want to really also give a sort of a acknowledgement to Geranimus. It's a lady who in 2015, she's an American doctor who worked in a society where there were predominantly black young women having babies. However, she started to notice that irrespective of the socioeconomic background, she could be seen a young black woman and a young white woman, but the young black women were at increased risk and poor outcomes. And she recognised something called an allostatic load, recognised sort of 10 biomarkers, which really essentially showed that there were increased risk of medical disorders. If we go on to the next slide. And this is a combination of the cycle of stress and the reliving of trauma, and they're factored in the system. Imagine if you've got somebody that comes into a maternity unit, sort of white, middle class, meets these other people like herself, is treated in the same way, goes out, feels happy. Imagine somebody goes into that place, they're trying to talk to the doctor about something. They are stereotyped. I see it all the time. I see it in places I go. They feel frustrated, they feel stressed, they have a catecholamine drive, a chronic inflammation, a cortisol effect, immune decline, sleep deprivation, and it affects them in every single way. On to the next slide, please. So I want us to remember, for us as healthcare professionals and people who are here to really look after this group, is it more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has? We need to know the women that are in front of us. We need to listen. On to the next slide, please. Compassionate and personalised care in obstetrics, do we hear the silent cries? That's my question. Next slide, please. Compassion originates as an empathetic response to suffering, a rational process which pursues patients' well-being through specific ethical actions directed at finding a solution to their suffering. So even if I, for example, as a person, I recognise I'm black, British, but I may not understand people of South Asian origin. So at the moment, I would go through a period of self-reflection and read books about people from that background or other ways, so that I know that when I see somebody in clinic, I will be able to hopefully reach out to them in a different way. But also to recognise that because there is a difference with people like that, I need to have a heightened sense of compassion, a heightened sense of listening to really understand and unpick the differences in their care that are required, because I may not automatically see them or hear them. Next slide, please. So we mustn't lose sight. Who do we see? We have to look beyond the surface. We have to look into their eyes, and we have to feel the humanity and feel the pain. We must look and understand the trauma that sometimes we cause these people directly and also by association, and we mustn't become emotionally detached. Next slide. So cultural sensitivity, which I know that our next speaker will talk a little bit more about, is really a perception of the practitioner's lack of compassion in delivering physical care, and a woman's inability to develop confiding or confidence in the relationships with the professionals during pregnancy and childbirth. So, for example, this study would, again, try to input a system onto a group of people feeling that's what they wanted. They wanted to develop a separate group for black women, but actually the black Caribbean women didn't want that. They wanted to be in mixed ethnic groups to receive their care. They didn't want it to just be mono-ethnic. They wanted a culturally sensitive model, because there was much to be gained by mixing, and diversity, I believe, in so many dimensions is power to all. Everybody within the system gains. Next slide, please. So care is not optimal because of the barrier, because the barrier we don't see, the barrier and the confidence is not in us. So, for example, in the story from the first lady who died, the barrier was put up because they were told not to come back, in a sense. So whereas they would want to go back to hospital, and it's sad to hear the mother almost put that on herself, it wasn't. It should have been an open-armed discharge if you are not well, come back. We will see you any time. We will see you 24/7. If you feel your baby's not moving, come back. We care about you. And that opens up women to feel that freedom to come back into that system where they're supposed to be taken care of and their care optimised. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about, again, you know, we've got lots of work that's gone on. You can see this is in 1992. This is years old. You know, what's the year are we now? 21. So we're talking about 30 years almost. Talking about cultural awareness. So this is us beginning to step towards it. It's now becoming, I think, a bit more culturally sensitive, but we need to make sure that we are culturally safe. It has to be defined by those who receive the service. And until our service users are involved and embedded within developing the service, we still will not get it right. Next slide, please. Again, I just wanted to show you there's some work Ruth to Susan. I love this because it talks about addressing racism in the Aboriginal Islander people in Australia. And what I love about it is the statement in 2 in particular that talks about, you know, some people get a bit insulted when you talk about systemic racism, not realising actually that it's not about people saying that somebody set up a system to be racist. It's just because people haven't been included or it hasn't moved on or developed to deliver the care for the people who receive that care. One size healthcare doesn't fit all. Standardised PPE cause people to die. You know, standardised healthcare protocols that don't fit all. You know, presumptions about the what we call the Afro-Caribbean pelvis. It doesn't fit all. All pelvises are different. You know, race is a construct. We're all ethnically diverse in many ways. And then culturally safe healthcare systems are more likely to be used by those who need it. And the only person who can define if that system is culturally safe are the people who need it. Next paragraph. So the value of person-centered compassionate care is systemic and personal benefits. Improvement in health outcomes, efficiency, productivity, safety. This has been shown time and time again. Enhanced communication, reduced emotional stress and psychological stress. But one thing which I think is empowering is the ownership of health. So really speaking to people as they are intelligent. You know, I will give an example of seeing a woman the other day who you would think on first glance was perhaps not born in this country. Her husband, they were from South Asian origin. Her husband was dressed in traditional attire, as was she. And I saw her there on the bed as people told me that she was fully dilated. She had twins and she'd had a previous normal delivery before, and that she should probably be going for a vaginal delivery. I looked her in the eyes and I said to her, "How do you want to have your baby?" And her reply in a very articulate manner was, "I do not want the risk of whatever percentage she quoted to me for the second twin. I want a cesarean section." Prior to that, she had been on a pathway of vaginal delivery with everybody that was there with her, but I had to respect her wishes. I'm not God, I can't guarantee the outcome of that second baby, but I know that if I do according to her wishes, she would have that person-centered, personalised, compassionate care, and her babies were born safely. I allowed her to own her health. I respected her choice and her decision, and that is very important. Next slide, please. So again, just still going back on the same things, listen, see, embrace. Understand that an accent doesn't mean lower intelligence. Just because somebody speaks in an accent doesn't mean you speak slower in a staccato. They can still hear you. Understand that difference is valuable. I love difference. I work in a diverse unit and it's fantastic. Ensure that diverse staff are included in mandatory education, which includes skill for cultural sensitivity. You need to have systems to pick up the silent cries. I am privileged to be head of policy and safety for maternity, so I will ask them to do a sub-analysis of all the complaints. I want to know where the ethnic variation is. I want to know where the women are coming from, so I understand if there's some undercurrents that we're not picking up. Ensure that birth preparation includes cultural competence in a way that we prepare. Understand this and where women are coming from. have a system development which is diverse with using the families, and postnatal support that respects and understands the culture. There are also a lot of women who complain about breastfeeding support, that there's a narrative that people from ethnic backgrounds just want to bottle feed, and they are met with a huff and a puff by their caregivers. I'll just say to you, please look again. Next slide, please. So the goals of the compassionate, culturally compassionate system are advocacy and respect, reflection and awareness of self and of your own system, compassionate connections, reaching out to cultural communities, also the culture in which you deliver that care, so zero tolerance for poor communication, and diversity development within your teams, as well as reaching out to your community. And then the next slide, please. So you can do, again, I love Ruth to Susan. I've put this up so that you can have a look at the stuff that she does in your own time and think about safer care. This is not necessarily relating to maternity, but talks about the session about thinking about yourself, thinking about your identity, who you are, how do you challenge, how do you think about your privilege shifts? Is oppression structural? Does it occur within your system? And really understand the invisible things that you don't see, as in the financial restraints, which don't necessarily mean somebody's not intelligent, but to recognise your position and how you interact with others. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide. I'm just really saying it's in your hands. And really, I know that, again, this is taken from an Australian work that was being done, but think about your awareness, recognise your own culture and your acceptance, respect of other cultures. Don't consider yourself to be the best culture, they're all different. This is from New Zealand, actually, sorry. And then connection, think about connecting with your client and your family. Think about your communication as well. It's a subjective experience. I've definitely been there. I didn't really talk much about poor outcomes in other areas of my interaction with healthcare, but I've had poor outcomes interaction with my son. I've mentioned it in some of the talks before. My son almost died because they did not listen. And because my husband is got an African accent, he went with my son to A&E twice. I went the third time, they still didn't listen, and it was only when somebody reviewed his chest x-ray and realised that he had a white-out lung, as in one lung had gone with the severity of his pneumonia, that they eventually admitted him. So, you know, we could talk forever about clinical signs, jaundice, not being able to see, hypoxia. So communicate, speak to people, and they will tell you what they are experiencing. Mutual understanding, negotiation, extend your hand out. We should learn to be the people that extend the hand, not expect other people to reach out to us. When you see somebody who appears a bit harder or a bit aggressive, recognise where they're coming from in society. Recognise who has hardened their heart. Have you got a face that reminds them of a teacher who put them down, of somebody in the shop who ignored them? Unfortunately, sometimes that's the case, and it means that people appear hard. Open up and warm your heart towards them. So again, partnership and advocacy, look at your women's networks and really ensure that people have a voice and are inputting into how to change systems. And together, we can make a difference. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jawash, for sharing your insights from your perspective as an on-the-ground obstetrician, but also your own personal experience. I'm sure there will be questions for you, but I appreciate that because of your clinical commitment, you can't attend our Q&A this afternoon. So if any of our listeners do have questions for Dr. Jawash, please send them through in the normal way and we will pick them up with her afterwards. So thank you once again. We're now going to take a really short 5-minute comfort break. Please do stay connected. We'll be back here at 11:15, and my colleague Sarah Whelan's will be here after the break to introduce our next speakers. So thank you to you all and see you shortly.
welcome back everyone. Before we restart, can I just remind everyone that if you have any questions, please do send them through for our panel discussion a little later on. We are now going to hear from Banesh Nazmeen, who's a practicing midwife with a special interest in addressing health inequities and breaking down barriers to care. She currently works in Bolton. She's a midwifery ambassador for NHS England, addressing current challenges in midwifery such as staff attrition and retention, recruitment and public media perceptions of midwifery. Banesh remains passionate about continuity of care and demedicalising birth. It's a pleasure to hand over to Banesh to hear more.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the team at Irwin Mitchell and the speakers before me that have been talking on a subject so close to my heart. I'm going to start with a bit more of a mixed media approach, which will probably mean we're going to have tech issues on and off, and I do apologise in advance, but I'm going to be talking about racism, bias and cultural safety in practice, and I'm going to talk to you as if you are my friends and welcome you to just have some reflection, time to reflect on ourselves, on what we have experienced, what we have seen, what has happened to us, and then sometimes what has happened by us. The realities have been highlighted already by Lena. You know, the statistics have been mentioned already, so I'm not going to go over them all again, but the realities are certain communities from diverse ethnic backgrounds are more likely to have poorer outcomes in maternity, but also COVID has highlighted this is through health in general. And I'm going to talk to you about bias. So bias is something that everybody has. It is something that is an innate function, and traditionally in our Neanderthal stages, this used to tell us what thing is safe and what thing or what animal is unsafe and how do we survive. Because our brains take in so much information all the time, we have this form of as a survival instinct. So we bunch a whole group of people together based on one experience, if not an experience, but based on one opinion of someone we love or trust, or the media or society, all those influences. So as well as being a noun, it's something we have, it's also a verb, it's something that can be done to us or we can do to others. And for example, when I give an example of that to clinicians, I talk about handover and how certain terms and words we use during handover can give you an impression of individuals. One thing I always recommend is individuals and clinicians go through documentation and look at what kind of words are being used to describe an individual. I have looked in my governance work through enough documentation to know that I am more likely to see words like non-compliant, non-attender, angry, aggressive in notes that belong to people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, whereas words like anxious, worried, concerned are more likely to appear in people's notes who are from white European backgrounds, and it's just something that I see over and over again. And these are examples of how bias can show itself and present itself, but also how the next person who's going to read those notes is going to get an impression of the individual before they even go to care for the individual. For a lot of people in health, when it comes to maternity, there are a high percentage of female staff. Nursing and midwifery have around 70, well, midwifery more so, but nursing has about 70% of its staff are female. So talking to those who identify as women, I would say, what does it feel like to be the only woman in the room, or going out in certain areas in certain places? Now, this is some examples of more comical ways, and my personal favourite is the "to all intelligent men, don't be afraid of your intelligence. It's okay to be a man and be intelligent. Some women actually find it attractive." This is taking your traditional sexism or misogyny, those kind of biases, and twisting it on its head and trying to remind us of how nonsensical some of these things are and how silly they are when you flip them on their head and actually think of them from a different perspective. So this is how I introduce bias and racism. I kind of say a lot of us are familiar with the isms. There's transphobia, there's sexism, there's ageism, there's ableism, but racism seems to be the one that people get really uncomfortable talking about it and get very defensive when it's said. But it exists in the smallest things we say and do sometimes. And it presents itself over and over again, and in healthcare more so. These are all within the last few years, all of these articles. But the question is, why do we think that Black or people with darker skin tones have thicker skin? Why are they less likely to feel pain in the same way? The perception is that Black women have stronger pain thresholds, but Asian women have lower pain thresholds, but the outcome is the same. Neither of them get pain relief in a timely manner when they ask for it because of this assumption. Black babies are more likely to die in the US if they are being taken care of by a white practitioner, but less so if they're being taken care of by a Black practitioner. Is this something to do with the way we are taught in universities? Because we know in the Western world, the curriculum is Eurocentric. When we are being taught that the norm is the white body and everything else. When we are actually differentially talking about them or teaching about them, only negative connotations are brought up. For example, we should know what jaundice looks like in Black and brown skin tones. We should know mastitis looks like. We shouldn't be writing pink, that a baby is pink. Which baby is pink? My friend, who is a very close ally of mine, she's white British, she says, I'm not pink. So why are we writing pink, that a baby is pink? Why are we not talking about, redness as a sign? Why are we saying that redness is a sign of certain things, and we're still getting marks for that and writing that down in exams, when actually if someone with Black skin tone is going red, you should be really, really worried. Other signs have come before that, which we have already missed, and cyanosis. All of these things that we should be being taught of how they present in different skin tones, we're not, but we're being taught about female genital mutilation. And we are being taught about consanguinity and the negative connotations around those, but not the balanced argument of, well, FGM is also clitoral piercings, it's also labioplasty, and these are Western world phenomenons, or the fact that actually, incest and marriage within families has existed for a very long time, and we don't need to look far. We can look at our royal family historically and the relations that have been happening in those historically. It's traditions that we seem to have put a lens on, and we can't seem to think out of a box, or we're not being taught to think outside of the box. And then we bring those into care. And what happens is we have people facing that. So perceptions that Asian women have a shorter perineum. When asked and questioned about what is the norm though, shorter to whom, the thought is that the white norm is the norm. So a white woman's perineum is considered normal, therefore everything else is abnormal. But if we think about it, the global majority is people from different ethnic skin tones, rather than the white Western perception. Conversations and researchers highlighting this, that the pain relief keeps coming up over and over again, that there's a perception about if you're from an ethnic minority background, you're less likely to get pain relief in a timely manner. If you're from an Asian background, you need less support because you're being generally well supported by your family, apparently, and you have a lower pain threshold when in labour, that you're more likely to make fuss and are non-compliant and are too demanding. The race comes into it as well, and religion. People are facing Islamophobia and feeling like they are being treated differently just based on their appearance and their outfits that they wear. We have conversations around well, if this is the perceptions and the stereotypes and assumptions being made about these individuals, how does that impact them? How are they going to come up and say that, you know, this is happening to me and I need to put my trust in you, when actually I don't actually know if you will believe me, or if you will judge me, or if you will listen to me. This is the barrier that we are facing. How are people, and Karen said it earlier, how are people going to turn to you for help when we have put barriers in their way, unconsciously or unknowingly, but we have? I'm going to talk to you about migrant gratitude, the kind of things and the ways we have had to learn to live and to adapt, to fit in to a country that we have been othered in. And I'm going to read a poem. It goes, listen, my father speaks Urdu, language of dancing peacocks, rosewater fountains. Even its curses are beautiful. He speaks Hindi, suave and melodic, earthy Punjabi, salty rich as saag paneer, coastal Swahili laced with Arabi. He speaks Gujarati, solid ancestral pride. 5 languages, 5 different worlds, yet English shrinks him down before white men. These are the lessons learnt by our parents, our grandparents, our families when they came to the UK. This is the beginning of what we call intergenerational trauma. They teach us that we need to be accepting, be forgiving, not rock the boat, not raise concerns, because if we were to do any of those things, we would not fit in, or we would be sent away, or we would walk down the street and get beat up, because that was the time that they were brought up in, and those were the lessons they taught their children, and those are the barriers that come from within. So when we raise complaints or raise our voices or ask for help, we've already overcome the lessons that our parents have taught us to ask for help, because in a way we have been taught that we are not allowed to ask for help. So when we are not asking, what is it? What barriers are also existing? Well, language barriers, and this is a structural issue. We talk about, you know, someone's already mentioned interpreting services. Are they available? But also, how long are you using your interpreters for? A 15-minute appointment is not enough to talk about anything, I believe anyway. But if you are using an interpreter, that cuts your appointment in half. 7.5 minutes to talk about, just to do your normal antenatal checkup, to have a conversation, to allow a person to ask questions, to address those questions, to make informed decisions. Is that enough? Not really. Why are we not having longer appointments and appointments according to the needs of the individuals? I, as an Asian woman, know that I'm going to be less likely to pick up the phone to a healthcare professional. I'm more likely going to be asking my mum, my sister, my best friend, before I pick up the phone to triage. And as was mentioned before by Sylvia, around everything that happened with the loss in their family, when they asked for help, they didn't get it, and then later on it was delayed. So we really need to think, if people are asking for help, how long have they already delayed before they asked us for that, and what have they overcome to ask us for help? we need to remember cultural practices are so important, but if we don't have the trust, how are we going to know what cultural practices are taking place? How are we going to learn, and how are we going to make sure that we can encourage that they do their cultural practices in a safe manner? Understanding different systems. I was talking to service development students a few months ago, and they were asking me, how do you access maternity services? And when I actually sat down and thought about it, I was like, how do you access maternity services? Well, I know because I'm a midwife, but each hospital has its own way. Sometimes you have to go to your GP and then you're dependent on your GP to refer you to the hospital. Other times you have a phone number you call, but then you're dependent on the receptionist making sure that everything is inputted in appropriately, and then someone follows up. There's no one way of doing it. There's no right way of doing it. But then we've got barriers for asylum seekers and refugees, because then we ask them for an address, and then we ask them for paperwork, and we ask them for X, Y, Z, A, B, C. We don't make it easy, and we don't make it straightforward. And I'm an articulate, educated, UK brought up individual. I was 4 years old when I emigrated to the UK, but still I know the system well enough. But I still don't know what my local hospital does and how I would access maternity services there. Antenatal classes and antenatal education. We say that these communities do not access antenatal education. Well, they want to access it, but is it at a time that's appropriate for them? Is it in a space where they can access it? Is it available in a language that they prefer to use, understand, and are more comfortable in? Is it actually accessible? And I'm going to talk about my mum. She was at like medium risk for diabetes and was offered the Daphne course about diabetes, and I was brilliant. I called them up. I said, can I book my mum in for this course, please? They said, yeah, brilliant. We booked him in. I said, okay, have you got it available in English? No. Have you got it available in Urdu? No. Okay. Have you got interpreters available? No. Can I come and interpret for my mum? No. Okay. So this person who's high risk, a high chance of having this issue, has got this brilliant opportunity to learn and educate herself, but can't access it because the system is made to be inaccessible. And then we have the issue around pain relief. I'm not going to go over that again. It seems to be that in our conversation and in research, and when talking to these families, these communities, they do feel like they know when they're being stereotyped, they know when they're being marginalized, they feel it and they can recognize it, and they can recognize that they're being disrespected, but they still, in the South Asian community, trust you and your opinion and your recommendations, believing you have the best in their heart, because that's what they have been taught by their parents, because authority figures are just trying to do what's right for us, right? And then when things go wrong, they remain positive. They believe in the best. They think that they are going to be able to get the help they need. When it doesn't, even though they're less likely to get the postnatal checkups to the same level or see the midwives as often as they would like, even when they don't necessarily have the contact details as easily accessible for the midwife or the health visitor, or when they've had a poor outcome, they're less likely to complain, because our families have taught us not to complain. If you were to look at your local trust PALS referrals and complaints, you're going to see a disproportion to your demographics when it comes to complaints based on ethnicity, because these communities are disengaged. The language we use and the way we speak, it's been ingrained in us, and I can't quite explain how much so as this fella here, so I'm going to let him do some talking. Let me put the volume up.
And I always ask my mother, I said, Mother, how come is everything white? I said, why is Jesus white with blonde hair and blue eyes? Why is the Lord's Supper all white men? Angels are white, Pope and Mary and even the angels. I said, Mother, when we die, do we go to heaven? She said, naturally we go to heaven. I said, but what happened to all the black angels when they took the pictures? I said, oh, I know. If the white folks was in heaven too, then the black angels were in the kitchen preparing the milk and honey. She said, listen, you quit saying that, boy. I was always curious, and I always wondered why I had to die to go to heaven. Why I couldn't have pretty cars and good money and nice homes now. Why do I have to wait till I die to get milk and honey? And I said, Mama, I don't want no milk and honey. I like steaks and I said, milk and honey is a laxative anyway. They have a lot of bathrooms in heaven. So anyway, I was always curious. I always wondered why. You know, Tarzan is the king of the jungle in Africa. He was white. White man. I saw this white man swinging around Africa with a diaper on, hollering. Oh! You all see Tarzan over here, Tarzan? And all the Africans, he's beating them up and breaking the lion's jaw. And here's Tarzan talking to the animals. And the Africans been there for centuries, and he yet can't talk to the animals. I always wonder why Miss America was always white. All the beautiful brown women in America, beautiful suntans, beautiful shapes, all type complexions, but she always was white. And Miss World was always white, and Miss Universe was always white. And then they got some stuff called White House cigars, White Swan soap, King White soap, White Cloud tissue paper, White Rain hair rinse, White Tornado flow wax. Everything was white, and the angel food cake was the white cake, and the devil food cake was the chocolate cake. Mommy, why is everything white? I always wondered, you know, and the president lived in the White House. And Mary had a little lamb, his feet as white as snow and Snow White, and everything was white. Santa Claus was white, and everything bad was black. The little ugly duckling was the black duck, and the black cat was the bad luck. And if I threaten you, I'm going to blackmail you. I said, Mama, why don't they call it white mail? They lie too. I was always curious. And then this is when I knew something was wrong.
I always bring that one back and bring it back to that because it reminds us that we know the importance of language and we know the importance of how it affects individuals we care for when it comes to clinical language. But what about the language and the words we use on the day-to-day, every single day? Because that is perpetuating biases and stereotypes. And sometimes before we can even get clinical and caring for others, we really need to reflect deep down on what we have internalized and picked up from our exposure to society, to media, to those around us. What echo chambers are we in and what are we hearing? Whose voices are not represented and whose voices have we not heard? And how do we educate ourselves? Karen has already beautifully spoken about this earlier, so I'm not going to go into it in more detail. But the reality is we need to be culturally safe practitioners, and to be culturally safe, what we need to know is first understand what we have internalized, what biases and inflections of racism we carry inside us, because only then can you start your journey towards being culturally safe. Only when you know what might affect the way you care for someone can you check it at the door and recognize you have that, go in and care for someone despite that, knowing that this might, if you didn't know about it, have affected the way you were going to treat this individual, the way you were going to listen to this individual, the way you were going to react to this individual and their family and their needs. We need to be culturally safe practitioners, and that's what cultural safety is. There's a term going around called cultural competency, and we use it a lot. But to be culturally competent, you have to know about every single culture that exists. And that's extremely difficult. And every time people look at cultural safety and competency training, what they want is for someone to tell them about every single culture. That's not available because no one knows that. And if you do, you've got to spend a really long time to do that. What you need to do is work on yourself and know how that impacts others. That's what cultural safety is. And cultural sensitivity is, once that happens, you can only be culturally sensitive once you can recognize what is making an impact. When you're in handover and someone's handing over about that particularly difficult individual in that bay, or the really disturbing relatives that keep coming in that area, or the non-compliant individual there. When you start hearing these terms, you should question them. Your ears should prick up, especially when race or ethnicity is being pulled into it. That is when you're sensitive enough to know that it is there and question it and raise it. We have cultural safety courses which are available for all MDT individuals, which I'm not going to go into more detail because I'm conscious of time. And I would say this quote sums everything up. Change starts with you as an individual. You have to be the change you want to see in the world. So ask yourself some questions. Ask yourself, who do you not understand? Go learn, read about those groups. There's autobiographies, books and documentaries that will have different perceptions. You need to not question who the authors are, who the directors are, because if it's a white middle-class man telling you about a different ethnicity, maybe that's not the book that's going to be most true to what you need to know and understand. And who is making the decisions, and is this policy appropriate for all ethnicities, all diversities, neurodivergence, disabilities, all of these things. Our policies, our structures need to be questioned and raised, and only then can we start moving forward in the care we provide, because everyone deserves to be heard, seen and respected. And that's where we should be aiming for. That's how we should be providing our care, individualized, personalized care. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna try to stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Thank you so much, Pranesh, for such a refreshingly honest and open talk, which I'm sure will resonate with so many. We're now going to hear from 5 Times More, a grassroots organisation committed to changing Black women's maternal health outcomes in the UK. Having started in 2019, 5 Times More works tirelessly in supporting mothers with campaigning and focuses on empowering Black women to make informed choices and advocate for themselves throughout their pregnancies and after childbirth. I now hand over to Tanuke and Chloe to tell you a little bit more about the incredible work they do.
Hi, can you see me okay and hear me okay? I'm gonna assume everybody can hear, and I will just go ahead. So 5 Times More, tackling health inequalities in maternity. Next slide, please. So what is 5 Times More? Well, hello, I'm Tanuke. Forgot to introduce myself. I'm Tanuke, I'm one of the co-founders of the 5 Times More campaign. Before I go any further, I do want to highlight that whilst, you know, we are campaigning for 5 Times More, and I'll go a bit more into that. it is safe to give birth in the UK. For anybody who might be listening who is pregnant, the UK has one of the lowest mortality rates globally, like in the world. But however, there is a disparity in who is dying, and that is what our campaign largely focuses on. So there is a disparity in the numbers we see when it comes to maternal mortality, and we also, as an organisation, want to uncover what the lived experiences and the morbidity is for Black women. So 5 times more is, as Sarah said, a campaign to address and highlight and change Black women's maternal outcomes in the UK based on the fact that we are 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy, childbirth, and the 6-week period after. Now, again, I must stress that this we are called 5 times more because in 2018 and 2019, the statistics told us that we were 5 times more as Black women. It's now 4 times, it's gone down to 4 times, but this is not statistically significant. So we tend to still say 5 times, 4 or 5 or 4 to 5 times more. I'm Tineke, that's me. About this time last year, pregnant with my daughter Eden, who's now 1. I'm the founder of Mums and Tea, and I had, in a nutshell, how 5 times more started was I had a really terrible experience giving birth to my son in 2017. I had late diagnosed preeclampsia. I wasn't listened to. I felt like I just wasn't taken seriously. It was a really awful, traumatic experience giving birth to my son. And through Mums and Tea, which is a social network for Black mums, I found out that my experience was one that wasn't isolated. A lot of Black women also felt the same, like they just weren't listened to, further complications, and just feeling like, you know, they just weren't taken seriously. So I decided to join forces with Chloe, who runs Prosperities. She supports Black and Asian pregnant women. And I said, look, let's do something about it. This is just not right. In what we do, we support Black women in our communities. And, you know, between us, we've got the skills, we know the right people. We can make a song and dance about it and make sure that, you know, we scream and shout and that something gets done. So that's how it started. We started because we wanted to let women know what their rights were. We wanted to give women, just like we said, the opportunity to make sure that they felt empowered within their birth rather than, you know, just having the traumatic experiences over and over and over again. Next slide, please. So what do? We do a number of things within 5 times more. 5 times more, I must stress, is myself and Chloe. I often hear that we're a group of women, a group of health professionals. No, we are 2 mothers who are just very, very passionate and want to see a change within what we are seeing currently with Black women in maternity services. So we empower women with our 6 recommendations, and we also offer 100 Black women every month free access to a digital hypnobirthing course, which we've teamed up with Positive Birth Company for. We educate. We have all teamed up with the RCOG to give 5 steps for health professionals. This was a very important partnership because we just thought, you know, we are telling mothers what our recommendations are, but it's not just something that mothers need to be aware of. It's also something that health professionals should be taken into consideration. So that is how that came about. We give talks to university students, midwifery students as well. We raise awareness through our 5 times more selfie, which you can see people doing within the picture on the screen. I was going to say to my left, but it might be different for you. We try to keep the conversations going. We created the UK's first Black Maternal Health Awareness Week, and we are very passionate about amplifying. We want to amplify the voices of Black women who often feel like they are not being listened to. We also want to make sure that we are not just talking about the bad experiences, we're also talking about the good ones and highlighting the good experiences too, because we can learn from them all. It's not all bad. I've got 2 children. I had one really bad experience and one very largely positive experience, giving birth to my daughter last year in the pandemic. So we do want to, you know, highlight those stories so we can do more of the good. And lastly, we lobby. So as you may know, our petition last year got over 187,000 signatures, and this was debated, gosh, last month in Parliament. And we're just very passionate about, look, we want to highlight it, that's fine, but we need to change. So we are pushing the change makers, if you like, to make sure that this is something that gets taken seriously and gets looked at, and something changes. So we've given oral and written evidence to the Maternity Safety Inquiry, and we've been featured in a number of publications as well. Next slide, please. So what are some of the issues for Black women? I'll go through a couple of them here for time. Sorry, I should have mentioned as well in the beginning, I do have to dash at 12 because I'm at work, and my slot was until 12. So some of the myths are that we have different shaped spines and we have different shaped pelvises, and that our bodies can handle more pain. Our bodies do the black girl thing in labour. Now, I'll explain a little bit more about the black girl thing. This was a woman who approached us and told us her story, and she said that one of the midwives said, "Oh, you've done the black girl thing," and she was very confused as to what this was. And it's basically when she presented in the hospital. At first she was high and free, and then her labour progressed very quickly, and before you know it, she was ready to push, and apparently that was called the black girl thing by the midwife, which I'm still confused as to exactly what that means, but these are some of the things that we come across in as a health professional that said that to a woman. We're not being listened to. This is a common theme, it's a recurring theme, it's something that we hear all the time. Black women are not being listened to, and I believe that is leading to further complications down the line. Certainly in my case, I won't go into the details of what happened, but I believe that my assisted delivery could have been avoided with my son if I was just listened to, if the midwife just checked me over when I said that I was in pain. I believe I wouldn't have been so exhausted, and I just couldn't push by the time. So a lot of women, just feel like they're not being listened to. Mental health. So in the UK, depression and anxiety is most prevalent amongst Black women. Stereotypes. So you've got the stereotypes of the strong Black woman or the angry and loud Black woman, which obviously are very damaging and play a huge part into what we see going on, actually. If you've got the notion that, oh, you're strong, you can do it, oh, what are you complaining for? These are all things that are very damaging to us. And the fact that we have loads of children, this is a stereotype that I've heard as well. If this is my first pregnancy or if this is my 10th pregnancy, that doesn't make a difference as to how I feel pain or how any of the outcomes matter, because every pregnancy is different and everybody is different as well. So that shouldn't make a difference as to how I'm being treated as to how I may or may not feel pain. COVID, obviously last year, 2020, was a huge eye-opener. If you look at even simple things like how rashes and things are presented on Black skin, we see that is not actually taught within medical profession. So we can see that Black women are 8 times more likely to be admitted into hospital with COVID-19 as well. And this is another thing that we have to battle against, not being given the right information. So in the Maternity Safety Inquiry that I said that we gave evidence for, we did a consultation with over 400 Black women. And all in all, we have found out that Black women are not being given the right information in order to make informed decisions about their care. And we'll go into a little bit more about that, I think, on the next slide. Chloe, did you want to take these slides?
Yes, I'm just trying to unmute. Okay, so just like Tanuka said, oh, you're muted, thank you. Just like Tanuka mentioned, so last year we held a consultation to help the response to health The Health and Social Care Selected Committee, sorry guys. So we had 415 Black women who responded to the question that we asked. So I'm going to talk about two of the questions that we asked. The first one was, how confident did you feel with the staff? 67% of women said they felt confident, but sadly 33% of the respondents said they did not feel confident. Next slide, please. Oh, there was can you go back one, please? Sorry, there's a slide missing. Okay, there was supposed to be a slide on HSIB. I'll quickly go through it. So then we asked a question about health and safety investigation branch. So 94% of the respondents said they were unaware of the role that HSIB played, and then they were unsure of where to make complaint. Out of the 8% that did make a complaint, only 74% of them did not get a response back from HSIB. So they did not get a follow-up. And it shows that women were not given the right information to make complaints. And if they did make a complaint, they didn't know where to go to follow it up. Next slide, please. You're on mute. So I'll take this one. So these are the 6 steps that we came up with mums. Due to time, we're not going to go through all of it. So the first one is speak up. Tanika, do you want to take over? Are you okay?
I can't unmute.
You're on mute now. You're fine. We can hear you. Now you just muted yourself. Unmute. Okay, I'll take it up. So the first one is speak up. Second one is find an advocate. Third one is seek a second opinion. The third and the fourth one is trust your gut. The fifth is do your research. And the last one is document everything. So if you go on our website, you can find more information about our steps. Do you want to go through the next slide?
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, it says it's unmuted. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So we've got some positive quotes here from Black mothers who have either taken our steps or have engaged with the campaign and in some form have had really positive outcomes. So I'll go through a couple of them here. Your campaign gave me the confidence to speak out if I felt the tiniest of things were not okay. I had a lovely experience on my 4th C-section. Your campaign has empowered me, honestly, and for that I will be forever grateful for. And this one we always like to say because it was a really positive story from somebody who was originally told no to a poor birth, but with support and help from the 5 times more steps, I was able to have a water birth during the COVID pandemic and was able to advocate for myself, especially as a Black woman. So much so that I was approached by a midwife before being discharged, asking how I knew what to ask and who to speak to, because many women do not advocate for themselves and believe that they cannot challenge health providers. I didn't know my rights until 5 times more informed me and encouraged me. Next slide, please. Hello, I think you're taking these slides. You're on mute as well. I think we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Sorry, my mouse is not working no more. So these are the 5 steps that we co-produce with RCOG, the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynae. So the first one is listen. The next one is remove any barriers to communication. Check you're providing the correct information. Provide access to documentation. And the last one is to be a champion. Once again, you can go on our website where we have all the information. Next slide, please. So here is I am here to listen badge.
So we launched the I'm Here to Listen badge with guys in St Thomas Hospital last month. The aim of the project is to be a visual reminder that health professionals wearing the badges are taking active steps to ensure safer outcomes for Black women, and that they're following the 5 times more principles, so the 5 times more steps. The badge also serves as a reminder for Black women to know that anyone wearing the badges have been trained by 5 times more, and that we're here to listen. Okay, so we got the Do You Know Your Right campaign. So to round up Advocacy Month, we teamed up with AIMS on a joint project, and it's called Do You Know Your Right? And this is to give Black women information on their rights with pregnancy and childbirth. So these are frequently asked questions that women were concerned about and asked us. And these are some of the options. These are some of the questions that we answered for them. Next slide, please. And then we have the colourful birth wallets. So it's called Colourful Birth, Advocating for Safer Outcomes. So this was a project that we done with King's College Hospital. It's the first pilot site for the wallets. And the aim of the wallet is to empower women to advocate for themselves and to promote health and well-being in order to create a safer outcome. So on both sides, we have health and we got safety and well-being information for both women. So on one side, it has our 6 steps, where to call the midwife, information on their well-being. And on the other side, it also has information on how to look after themselves. So that's things like, you know, make sure you're hydrated, how to keep fit, etc. Next page. So I'm going to take the next one. I can't seem to see
Can
anything.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the Black Maternity Experience Survey. So basically, we, as part of our Advocacy Month, launched the Black Experience Survey. And our aim with this survey was to make sure that we were indeed capturing data. And a lot of the time, and especially, you know, it's within our petition debate, we heard from the minister that even with the current survey that they have going on about women's experiences, that Black women are underrepresented in the data. And we hear time and time again that there are gaps in the data. There are gaps in the data. I personally know people who work for PALS, which, patient advisory liaison services within hospitals. And they say that there is missing data on Black women. Black women are not complaining, they're not engaging. And you know, if there's a lack of trust, if they've had bad experiences, they're less likely to want to explain, come and tell them about if they feel like that they've not been listened to. Do you know what I mean? So what we said is that one of the key asks of our campaign is that Black women are involved at every single level of decision making. So we had we gathered an all Black panel, an expert panel, and we said that Black women need to be the focus and the center of trying to get their experiences heard. So that is why we came up with the Black Maternity Experience Survey. And so often we hear Black women, we can't find them, we don't know where they are, they're not engaging. But actually what we managed to do was within 24 hours is get 500 Black women to respond to this survey and tell us about their experiences, both positive and negative, so that we have a huge database where just under 1,000, I think we're probably over the 1,000 mark at this point, of women's experiences that we can take forward. We can continue to write recommendations and just advocate for more change. This is what we need, is more change. We need to know what's going on. Your data is only as good as the evidence that you've got, and clearly there's not that much evidence there for Black women. So we wanted to bridge that gap within that data. So that's a little bit more about our Black maternity experience survey. If you can, please go on our website because there are more details on there. So if you could help us share, that would be amazing. Next slide, please.
So what's important for Black women during pregnancy and the 4th trimester? Black women should be centre of their care. Take women on the individual basis. We're all different, and please just listen to us. Next slide. So thank you for listening. Sorry about all the technical mishap and whatnot. Please, if you want to get in touch with us, here's our website, email, Instagram and Twitter. And we can't stay on for any questions, but if you would like to send us any questions, we'll be happy to answer for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanuka and Chloe, for speaking to us today and for all the hard work you do and support you provide. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Julianne Moore, who's going to lead our Q&A panel discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julianne Moore and I'm one of the clinical negligence partners based in the Sheffield office. And it's been an absolute delight to listen to all the talks today. It's been very insightful and very informative, and I think we can all take away a lot of things from this. So I have the pleasure of hosting the Q&A session, and thank you for everyone that sent through some questions that we've been busy looking at and obviously discussing with our panel. And we've also had some really helpful feedback, so thank you for providing that feedback. And one thing that I wanted to share in respect to feedback, which has arisen as a result of some of the talks we've heard today, is a feedback from a delegate which I'd like to share. The feedback is that there are advocates for women in maternity setting, can be professional midwifery advocates or cultural safety champions. So if you need advocates, ask for them, especially the professional midwifery advocates who should be able to assist and help and advocate for women if they feel they're not being listened to. So again, we can obviously post something about that, so you can obviously reach out to those individuals. So I'll just move on to the first questions. Unfortunately, because of clinical commitments and other working commitments, Dr. Janash has had to rush off to do a clinic, and I'm not sure if Chloe or Tanuka are available again, but thank them all for speaking. So we should have available, hopefully, Benish, who's very kindly agreed to stay on, and Keisha and Sylvia. So we'll just talk about the first question. It's probably one that Benish can hopefully helpfully answer. So the first question is, how do we improve outcomes when our own Black and Brown staff members are treated differently? How would you suggest we change the narrative within the workplace? So Benish, I don't know if you can help us with that one. Thank you.
Hi. So I think first and foremost, it's up to our majority white British colleagues to be allies and to actually recognise, because it can be a very lonely place if you're the only person in that space, and you feel like you have to defend yourself. So really, and I have been in a position where people have been, everybody was on the other side and they were all my white British colleagues, and I was by myself, stood by myself, and I couldn't represent myself the way I would have liked to, because it felt so lonely. So we need our allies to stand by us and actually talk and support us in the situation. Don't leave us alone in that space, and afterwards message us privately to say, I'm so sorry that happened to you, because that's what's happening right now. We need you to stand by us when it's actually happening. We need you to support us and actually be witnesses and raise this on our behalfs, but also silence is compliance. You can't say that you're not racist and actually not stand up and speak up for our colleagues. You need to challenge, and then actually everybody needs to talk to our trust and hold them accountable for what they are doing. Talk to your Royal College of Midwives, the RCOG, and ask what their support is for Black and Brown colleagues. And also, the Association of South Asian Midwives and Society of African and Caribbean Midwives have recently put together a report with recommendations based on experiences of Black and Brown colleagues, and put that to the NHS England, RCM and the NMC, and ask them what they're doing. We need to keep raising this and supporting these kind of groups who are doing this work to make sure that it's not something that's just getting left alone. So support each other, find out what's out there, and ask your regulatory bodies what they are doing and hold them accountable and make sure they are representative.
That's really helpful, thank you, Vinish. And you can probably help us with the second question as well that we've had posed, is are there any national statistics and data collection methods for improving outcomes for ethnic minority mums?
So data collection has historically been quite poor when it comes to regular monitoring of it. However, the latest guidance is that we need to improve this. All trusts are being held to account to their data collection. And now I think it's on the CNST requirement. So minimum of 80% ethnicity data should be collected for you to be able to qualify for your CNST. Having said that, that's only ethnicity at booking. You know, the national statistics and surveillance stuff, they look at the ethnicity but don't necessarily break it down. For example, the Office of National Statistics last year released the data on years of ill health for women, and they looked at ethnicity and they broke it down into ethnicity, but they didn't actually do any comparative work. And when I worked with my colleague from NHS Digital, we did some number crunching, and if you're a white woman who lives in a socioeconomically deprived area in the UK, you have 10 years of ill health on average. But if you're from a Black, Asian or diverse ethnic background, you have 25 years of ill health in comparison, and you're living in the same area. So these comparisons aren't yet being made, so these links are not yet available. Having said that, England is getting better. Scotland and our Northern Ireland colleagues aren't collecting ethnicity data. They don't have the equivalent of Embrace, and they aren't looking at maternity. So that's something that our colleagues over there need to raise and ask why not.
Thank you, Vinish. We've also had another question I think you've very happily agreed to answer, is what practical steps can NHS trusts take now to reduce the inequality of outcomes for women from BAME communities and their babies?
So I am a specialist cultural liaison midwife. I have been invested in. When my original job title was continuity of care team leader, and when I asked why am I doing that role when there's health inequalities that exist, I was given the opportunity to look at the job role from a completely different angle. And now there are more and more trusts that are investing in equity midwives to look at data and understand and scope what's happening in each trust. First, to be able to look at how you can make improvements in your local trust, someone needs to understand and scope what's happening. So first, those steps need to be made. You need to invest in this. The NHS England the new equity lead that started in March is putting together an equity strategy, so there will be some support coming down from them soon. Having said that, someone actually needs to start building and looking at the data of what's happening right now, so that by the time that guidance comes through, you'll know where you're looking at and what you're focusing on for targeted work.
And Sylvia and Keisha, I don't know if you have any comments from, you know, a sort of family perspective on what you think from your perspective NHS trusts can do now to reduce inequality of outcomes for children, for women from BAME communities and their babies, from your experience? I think you're on mute, Keisha.
Keisha.
Thank you. Did you hear the question?
Yeah.
Go on, do you want to start? I can't remember. Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
Yes, it's just Bernice has been a really helpful perspective.
Can't hear.
Julian, I think you're on mute.
I can't come off.
Can hear you now.
Can hear you.
Oh. You're on mute again.
Right. Hopefully I'm staying off mute. I'm not going to move any arms or legs. So I was just saying that from the family's perspective, you know, having what you've gone through, etc., and what you've seen from the work that you've done, what practical steps do you think NHS trusts can take now to reduce the inequality and outcomes for women from BAME communities and their babies? What sort of practical steps are what you've seen on the ground that you think could help?
So we're working on some questions, and it's in the form of, have you spoken? Have you told them how you're feeling? And are they listening? Is the person listening to you? Are they, and from the response that you've got, have they heard you? And how do you feel once they've given you their answer? So we're going to be working on those sorts of those lines of questioning to see if they can get we can get midwives and the professionals to really and truly think about how it is that what they're saying or what they're doing or is coming over to you as a patient. We're trying to get clear to them that they need to be listening and they need to hear what it is that they're saying, and for the person to fully know that they've been heard and they've been listened to. I think that's the most important thing.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sylvia. I've got another question for Bernice here. So we've had a couple more questions that have just recently been posed. So Bernice, I don't know if you're able to, if you're still on, you can answer this. Where can we access positive cultural diverse images for birth and postnatal education? I think obviously what we've talked about, a lot of the images are of white women and white families. So, I think we need to obviously, change the narrative on that.
And this is an issue widely known and recognised. There's been a lot of work being done in regards to getting images over the last year, and the decolonising the images that exist currently. Currently, what exists already is images that are either negative or have not yet been are representative. So if you go on stock images, you'll get, when you put in mother and motherhood, you're going to get majority white European families together. So I know one of the magazines that does a lot of work, they have stopped paying stock image money and they just get an illustrator to illustrate animations for them, because it's easier to ask for something specific that way than it is currently to get representative images. And as we're moving forward, more and more photographers are being conscious of this and taking these images, but there is not a vast library that currently exists, and people need to invest and also share.
Yeah, I think share is probably the quickest way forward, isn't it, really? So no, that's really helpful. And I think we've got time for one more question that's just been posted. And this says, we have the most impactful colleagues showing that the care we give is not safe. It is not good enough. How do we move forward to ensure all areas of our health change our education and the way that we're trained? They say we're still using birth practices based on white bodies. We need to utilise resources like Malone's.
And this is for every practitioner out there. It's first question who's providing you these images, be that your universities that you go to, because you're paying for your university degree, so therefore you can ask for a variety of images and you can put the pressure on them, be that the trusts we work at that are doing training in that way, and we ask our practice facilitators, and we put the onus back on those people who are doing the teaching. There are resources that exist, like you said, Malone, he started the work, and there are other individuals that are gathering work to do this. But until we not only ask the questions, but also offer the solutions, we're not going to move forward. And there's individuals that are doing the work, but also it's not just their work to be done, it's everyone's work. So we all need to come together, and we all actually actively need to build our own resources up and offer them back, because no one wants to do the job and the work. And actually, if you look at who's come and presented today, there's me, there's Karen, Sylvia, Tineke, Chloe, Keisha. All of us are people who are people from different ethnic backgrounds. Why are our white British colleagues not as active, not as present in this? Because we need your help.
No, I think that's the key. So thanks very much, Binish. We've sadly not had an opportunity to answer all the questions, because obviously some of them were for our speakers that were unable to remain on the webinar for other commitments. So if you have sent a question, we've not answered it, and you've sent your email address, then we will endeavour to get a response and email you a answer. So that's the end of our question and answer session, and thank you very much for all our panelists. I'm going to hand back to my colleague Sarah, who's now going to close the webinar. So thank you.
Thank you for everyone for presenting, attending and contributing to this very, very important discussion. It's encouraging to note that action is being taken to bring about much needed change, but very clear that more needs to be done. After hearing such passionate speakers today, I'm hopeful that the tides are turning and will continue to do so. Please do look out for more webinars in our Maternity Matters series. And otherwise, as you can see on the screen, details of 5 Times More, the Delissa Christina's Princess Foundation. We work with some great organisations such as Make Birth Better and Birthrights, and you can see on the screen ways to signpost to them or reach out to them. Thank you everyone for attending today, and have a good rest of the day.